The wind moved softly over the valleys of northern China, long before the stones were set in place, long before the first wall was imagined as a single line across the mountains. The land stretched wide and untamed, rivers curling like ribbons of silver, forests deep with pine and oak, and endless grasslands where herds of horses galloped free. To the north, the steppes were alive with riders, nomadic tribes whose arrows flew from horseback, swift and sharp as hawks. To the south, fertile fields and villages thrived, their people planting millet and rice, their lives tied to the rhythm of the earth. But this harmony was fragile. In the centuries before China became one empire, the land was divided into kingdoms and states, each one striving for power. This was the Warring States period, an age of shifting alliances and constant battle. Stone walls and earthen ramparts were not new to China. Local rulers built their own barriers, short stretches of defense meant to guard their borders. Some were made of piled earth, pressed hard by wooden frames. Others were of stone gathered from nearby hills. Yet none stretched so far. None dared to unite the mountains, rivers, and deserts into one single line of defense. Then came a man whose vision was greater than any before him. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. In the year 221 BCE, after decades of war, he brought the feuding kingdoms together under his rule. His armies were relentless, his strategies brutal, his determination unshakable. Where once there had been 7 great states, Qi, Chu, Yun, Han, Zhao, Wei, and Qin, now there was only one empire, and he sat upon its throne.
Yet victory brought not peace, but a new challenge. The empire was vast, its borders stretching into rugged lands where the soil gave way to desert and mountain. From the north came the greatest threat, the Xiongnu, fierce nomadic horsemen whose swift raids struck terror into farmers and towns. Their horses were fast, their bows deadly, and their movements unpredictable. No single army could stop them forever. Qin Shi Huang knew that to protect his new empire, he would need something greater, something that stretched beyond the imagination of his people, and so the idea of a great wall began to take shape. It was not conjured from nothing. The first emperor saw the walls that earlier kings had built in fragments across the north. Some were crumbling, others still strong. He commanded that these walls be joined together, strengthened, extended. What had been many walls would become one vast barrier, a line across mountains and plains, rising like a spine against the horizon. It would not only defend, but declare his power, a monument that whispered, "This land is mine, and it will endure."
Imagine the scene. Soldiers marching across rugged ridges, their banners snapping in the wind, their boots crunching on frost-hardened earth. Surveyors climbed cliffs and looked out over endless stretches of land, tracing paths where the wall would rise. Smoke from campfires curled into the night as workmen and peasants pulled from their villages gathered in camps beneath the stars. The emperor's decree was clear. Stone by stone, earth by earth, the barrier must grow, unbroken, stretching farther than any man had ever seen. The Great Wall did not begin as a perfect ribbon of stone as we picture today. In its first life under the Qin, it was raw, rough, and immense. Layers of packed earth were pressed between wooden frames, beaten until they hardened like stone. In deserts, sand and reeds were woven into the structure. In rocky land, stones were piled into towering ridges. It was a wall born of the land itself, mountain stone where mountains rose, yellow earth where plains stretched wide. And behind its building was not only a dream of defense, but a demand of control. Qin Shi Huang was not a ruler who trusted easily. He sought to bind his empire with more than walls. He ordered roads, canals, a unified script, even the standardization of weights and measures. The wall was part of this vision, to knit together what had once been many into one.
But dreams came at a cost. Tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, were conscripted to work. Peasants, soldiers, even criminals. They carried baskets of earth on their backs, dragged stones up impossible slopes, hammered wood into place until their hands bled. The work was merciless. Summers burned, winters froze, and the northern winds cut like knives. Many never returned to their villages. Legends say their bones became part of the wall, their spirits bound to the stones they raised. Still, the vision pressed on. Across mountains dusted with snow, across valleys where rivers shone beneath the moonlight, across deserts that swallowed footsteps, the Great Wall began its long journey. It was not yet the wall we know, but its birth had begun. For the people who saw it rising, the sight must have seemed both terrifying and magnificent. Imagine standing in a village on the edge of the frontier, watching as soldiers and laborers built ramparts higher than a house, stretching as far as the eye could see. Imagine the thunder of hooves in the distance, the warning fires lit on hillsides to signal an attack, and then the comfort of stone rising to meet the threat. Qin Shi Huang did not live forever, though he tried, seeking elixirs and secrets of immortality. But the wall outlived him. His dynasty was brief, but his vision of a unified barrier endured, carried forward by dynasties to come. And though the stones shifted, though time weathered the earth, the idea had been planted, that China's strength could be written not only in words or armies, but in stone and earth, stretched across the skin of the land itself. And so, the dawn of an idea became the beginning of a monument. Not just a wall, but a story written in stone, one that would continue to grow, to fall, to rise again for thousands of years. The wall's first chapter had been written, carved by the will of an emperor and the hands of countless workers. It would not be its last.
The year was 221 BCE. The banners of the Qin dynasty now fluttered over lands that had once been divided by war. For the first time, China was united under a single ruler, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. His voice was law, his word unchallenged, his will as vast as the empire itself. But with unity came fragility. Beyond the fertile plains and walled cities of the south stretched the northern frontier, a land of open grasslands and restless riders. From the steppes came the Xiongnu, fierce warriors on horseback, moving swiftly as the wind. Their raids struck villages, burned crops, and carried fear into the hearts of farmers and soldiers alike. The emperor knew, if his new empire was to last, it needed protection, not just of swords and spears, but of stone and earth. Thus he gave the order. The walls of the old kingdoms must be joined together, rebuilt, extended.
What had been scattered defenses would become one long shield across the north. And so began the great labor of the Qin Wall. Not the stone battlements we imagine today, but a raw, immense structure of tamped earth, stretching like a scar across mountain ridges and desert sands.
The emperor commanded, and tens of thousands obeyed. Some were soldiers, sent not to battle but to labor. Others were peasants pulled from their homes, carrying tools and baskets. Criminals, too, were sent, their punishment to work until their bodies gave out. Families wept as fathers, sons, and brothers were taken away, vanishing into the frontier. Many never returned. By torchlight they marched. Imagine the long lines of men winding through valleys, their footsteps crunching on frozen soil, the clatter of wooden carts pulled by oxen, the sound of orders barked through the cold night air. Camps were set along the way, smoke curling upward, filling the mountains with the scent of burning pine. The work itself was merciless. The wall was built using rammed earth, layers of soil compacted between wooden frames, beaten with heavy tools until it hardened like stone. In rocky regions, stones were dragged from quarries, lifted up steep inclines by ropes and muscle. In deserts, reeds and gravel were woven into the mix. Every step forward was won by sweat, blood, and aching hands. Summers on the frontier burned with relentless heat. The sun beat down, and men toiled until their backs blistered. In winter, the northern winds screamed like knives, and snow covered the camps. Fires gave little warmth. Many workers froze where they stood. Hunger was constant. Supplies moved slowly across mountains, and rations were thin. Legends say that the dead were buried within the wall itself, their bones mingling with the earth, though historians believe most were laid in shallow graves nearby. To those who labored, it was not the Great Wall, but the Wall of Sorrows. Families cursed it. Songs of mourning were whispered at night. Mothers told children that the wall devoured men, as the desert devoured water. Yet for Qin Shi Huang, the wall was more than a defense. It was a statement, a declaration that his empire had boundaries, that his rule reached to the edge of the mountains, that the land itself was bound together by his will. Patrol towers were raised at intervals, places where soldiers stood watch. Beacon fires were prepared so that if riders attacked, flames would leap from tower to tower, carrying warnings faster than any horse. In valleys, fortresses anchored the wall, storing supplies, guarding passes. From a distance, the wall stretched like a living creature, its back rising and falling with the mountains, its body winding endlessly into the horizon. Farmers in nearby villages looked up and saw the wall cutting across ridges, a shadow against the dawn. Travelers passed along its base, their footsteps echoing in its presence. It was a work that seemed beyond human scale, as though giants had pressed the earth into shape. The first emperor visited the wall often in his mind, even as he traveled his empire. He was a man obsessed with immortality, sending expeditions to seek elixirs and magical islands where death could be defeated. But in the wall, He had already found his monument. Stones and earth would outlast flesh. Where his body might fail, the wall would endure, carrying his name through centuries. Still, the emperor's reign was short. In 210 BCE, while on a journey to the east, Qin Shi Huang died. His death was hidden for weeks by his ministers, the smell of rotting flesh disguised with carts of salted fish, until they could return his body to the capital. He was laid to rest in a vast tomb, guarded by the terracotta army, thousands of clay soldiers standing silent in darkness. His dynasty collapsed soon after, torn apart by rebellion and anger at the burden he had placed on the people. The Qin wall, too, suffered, sections crumbling without the constant force of imperial command. Yet the idea had been born. The wall would not vanish. Later dynasties would return to it, rebuild it, extend it, strengthen it, each adding their own stones to its endless line. What remains of the Qin wall today is not the towering stone battlement we picture, but fragments of rammed earth weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Yet if you stand upon those ruins, you can still feel the weight of history. You can see the horizon where riders once thundered, hear the wind that once carried the crackle of beacon fires, sense the ghosts of the men who labored there. It was the beginning, harsh, imperfect, incomplete, but the first thread of a vast tapestry that would one day become the Great Wall of China. And so, under the Qin, the wall took its first true form, a monument of suffering, ambition, and vision, stretching across the land like a boundary between worlds.
When the Qin dynasty crumbled, its walls too began to crumble. Rebellion tore the empire apart, and the harshness of Qin Shi Huang's rule lingered in bitter memory. But from the ashes rose a new power, the Han dynasty, born in 206 BCE. Where the Qin had been severe and short-lived, the Han would endure for centuries. Their empire would stretch wide, their culture would flourish, and their vision would carry the wall far beyond what the Qin had begun. The Han rulers understood the frontier was not quiet. To the north, the Xiongnu still rode across the steppes, their arrows whistling through the air, their raids threatening farms, markets, and caravan routes. The empire's survival depended on its ability to hold back these raids and secure the lifeblood of trade. And so, once again, attention turned to the long scar of earth that wound across mountains and deserts. The Han emperors gave the command. The wall must be rebuilt, strengthened, and stretched farther than ever before. The work was immense. Imagine the endless lines of workers once again, men carrying baskets of earth, others dragging stone along crude wooden sledges. Soldiers guarded the frontier, their armor glinting in the desert sun, their banners fluttering against the sky. Camps spread along the wild northern lands, tents huddled against the wind. In one place, a fortress rose. In another, a beacon tower stood waiting, its firewood stacked, its pit ready to be lit should danger appear on the horizon. What remains of the Qin wall today is not the towering stone battlement we picture, but fragments of rammed earth, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Yet if you stand upon those ruins, you can still feel the weight of history. You can see the horizon where riders once thundered, Hear the wind that once carried the crackle of beacon fires, sense the ghosts of the men who labored there. It was the beginning. Harsh, imperfect, incomplete, but the first thread of a vast tapestry that would one day become the Great Wall of China. And so, under the chin, the wall took its first true form, a monument of suffering, ambition, and vision, stretching across the land like a boundary between worlds. Unlike the Qin, the Han expanded deep into the western deserts. Their wall did not merely defend farmland, it guarded the arteries of trade. For during the Han Age, a new path was opening, a road that wound through mountains and deserts, carrying silk, spices, horses, jade, and stories from faraway lands. It would one day be called the Silk Road, a network of trade and culture that joined China to Persia, to India, and eventually even to Rome. The wall was not only a shield, but a gate. It was the guardian of caravans that carried wealth across continents. The Han Wall was built not only of earth, but of reeds, gravel, and stone. In deserts, men wove branches into the layers of earth to bind them against the dry winds. In mountains, stones were stacked into watchtowers that rose above the ridges. At night, torches flickered upon their heights, a reminder that the frontier never slept. The soldiers of the Han lived along the wall, far from the cities of the south. They endured bitter winters when snow drifted over the ramparts, and lonely nights when the howl of wolves echoed through valleys. Their duty was endless: to watch the horizon, to guard the caravans, to protect the farmers who tilled the borderlands. Songs tell us that soldiers sang of their longing for home, of wives and children left behind, of fields they would never see again. Some grew old on the frontier, their bones laid in the earth beside the very wall they guarded. The wall itself became a place of encounters. Along its gates, merchants passed with laden camels, bringing silks that shimmered like water, spices that perfumed the air, glass from distant lands, horses from the steppes. Alongside them came travelers, envoys, and wanderers. Stories moved with them, tales of kingdoms where the sun set into seas, of strange animals with horns and stripes, of empires rising beyond mountains no Chinese had seen. The wall listened, silent, as voices of many tongues drifted against its stones. Yet the wall was also a place of hardship. Workers toiled under the sun, their hands cracked, their lips dry, their shoulders bent beneath the weight of baskets. Many died in deserts where water was scarce, their bodies swallowed by shifting sands. Still, the wall pressed on, stretching farther, weaving its way into the vastness of the frontier. As decades passed, the wall under the Han became more than defense. It became part of the empire's identity. It marked where the world of the Han ended and where the unknown began. Standing atop a watchtower, a soldier could look south and see the fields, villages, and markets of the empire, filled with voices, color, and life. To the north stretched the wild. Endless grasslands, riders on the horizon, the winds of the steppe. The wall was the line between order and chaos, between empire and wilderness. Historians tell us that Emperor Wu, one of the most powerful rulers of the Han, poured vast resources into the frontier. Under his command, the wall was extended through deserts, forts were stocked with soldiers, and outposts were built like stepping stones leading westward. He sought not only to defend, but to expand, to push back the Xiongnu, to bring new lands under Han influence. And so the wall grew, not only in length, but in meaning. It was no longer simply a barrier. It was a bridge of empire.
Alongside its shadow, markets grew, soldiers settled, villages appeared. Life clung to the frontier, hardened by its winds, yet sustained by its protection. The wall shaped not only geography, but destiny, guiding the flow of trade, the spread of culture, the rhythm of life itself. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the silence beneath the grandeur. You can hear the footsteps of weary workers trudging through dust. You can hear the sighs of soldiers watching the horizon with tired eyes. You can hear the creak of carts, the crack of whips, the cries of camels in the night. The wall was strong, but it was built on sacrifice. Layer upon layer of human labor pressed into earth and stone. As centuries passed, storms swept across the land. Some sections crumbled, others stood firm. Empires rose and fell, yet the wall remained, its shape winding across mountains like the spine of a dragon, its shadow stretching across deserts like a river of silence. Under the Han, it became more than the dream of Qin Shi Huang. It became a living frontier, a thread binding east to west, past to future. And when the nights grew long, when the desert winds carried only the sound of sand and the soft crackle of fire in beacon towers, the wall seemed less a work of men and more a whisper of eternity. It watched, it endured, it dreamed with the empire it guarded. The desert winds carried the scent of dust and faraway rivers, sweeping gently across the endless stretches of earth where the Great Wall of China had stood for centuries. By the time the Tang dynasty rose in the early 7th century, the wall was no longer just stone and earth piled for defense. It had become a living boundary, marking the rhythms of empires, merchants, poets, and wandering soldiers who traced their steps across its shadow. The Tang dynasty began in 618 CE, after the turbulence of the Sui, where the Sui had exhausted the people with their vast and unrelenting projects. The Tang brought a sense of balance, of energy and renewal. Chang'an, the Tang capital, became the beating heart of the empire. Its gates welcomed diplomats from Korea, monks from India, merchants from Persia, and emissaries from the far west. Streets bustled with voices in a dozen tongues, and silks from southern looms brushed against carpets from Samarkand. Beyond those crowded streets, however, stretched the fragile frontier. To the north and west lay the steppes, home to horsemen whose speed and ferocity had long tested China's borders. The wall stood as a silent watcher there, its long silhouette reminding both farmer and soldier alike that the empire's safety depended not only on armies, but on vigilance. In the Tang period, the wall was less about heavy construction of new fortifications and more about adaptation, repairing, patrolling, extending where needed. Garrisons dotted the frontier, small clusters of wooden watchtowers and barracks where soldiers lived far from the luxuries of the capital. These men saw the wall differently than the poets in Chang'an. To them, it was not a symbol of civilization, but a cold, wind-beaten line against hunger and uncertainty. Nights were long and quiet, broken only by the crackle of a fire, the creak of leather armor, and the distant howl of wolves echoing from the mountains. Yet the Tang rulers understood that the frontier was not merely a place of threat. It was also a bridge.
The Great Wall overlooked the Silk Road, that vast artery that carried silk, spices, tea, and ideas between East and West. Caravans moved slowly, their camels laden with goods, their drivers humming low songs to keep rhythm in the silence of the desert. Each caravan that entered through the gates of the wall brought wealth to the empire and new knowledge to its scholars. Paper, invented in China, traveled westward in this era, eventually transforming the world. Buddhism, carried centuries earlier from India, deepened its roots in Chinese society, shaping art, temples, and even the language of poetry. One can imagine the scene. A caravan approaches a fortified pass at dusk, the wall looming above like a dark ridge. Torches flicker along the watchtowers, their flames bending in the wind. The guards, weary from long hours, straighten at the sound of bells tied to camel harnesses. The traders bow, their goods are inspected, and then, slowly, the great wooden gates creak open. Inside lies the empire, its promise of markets and protection, its weight of rules and taxes.
But for all its grandeur, the Tang dynasty was not immune to challenge. The wall, for all its vigilance, could not keep every rider at bay. From the north came the Turks, fierce confederations of steppe tribes who tested the Tang armies. Battles flared, victories were won, but the frontier was never still. There were years when Tang banners flew boldly beyond the wall, deep into Central Asia, and there were years when defeat forced withdrawal, when garrisons huddled behind stone and earth, hoping reinforcements would come. Still, the Tang found ways to weave strength from fragility. They built alliances, arranged marriages with steppe leaders, offered trade to some tribes and war to others. In these choices, the wall played its part, both barrier and meeting place, both line of defense and line of connection. The poets of the Tang, who filled scrolls with ink and brush, often turned their gaze toward this frontier. They wrote of lonely soldiers staring into the northern skies, of wives waiting endlessly for husbands who never returned, of the wind that carried both the scent of home and the breath of exile. Li Bai, one of the most celebrated Tang poets, once wrote of the moon shining over frontier walls, its silver light binding together lovers separated by distance. In such verses, the wall became more than architecture. It became an emotional landscape, a canvas on which longing, loyalty, and loss were painted. As the centuries turned, the Song dynasty followed the Tang. Their capital shifted, their politics evolved. Their enemies grew more pressing. Where the Tang had been powerful, expansive, confident, the Song were often cautious, scholarly, inventive. They nurtured an age of science, art, and trade, yet their military strength lagged behind. The wall once again became crucial, for beyond it rode the Khitan Liao, the Jurchen Jin, and eventually the Mongols, steppe powers who saw opportunity in every weakness. In the quiet hours of dawn, when the desert sky shifted from indigo to pale gold, the Great Wall stretched like a shadow of the earth itself, endless and patient. The Tang dynasty had given the wall its role as both guardian and gateway. But as the centuries moved, the Song dynasty inherited a more fragile world. Their emperors, thoughtful and scholarly, often found themselves balancing dreams of cultural brilliance against the hard reality of military vulnerability. For the Song rulers, The wall was both a shield and a mirror, reflecting their hopes and their fears. Where the Tang had marched confidently into Central Asia, the Song often had to pay tribute to northern neighbors, buying peace with silver, silk, and tea. Yet within their cities, something remarkable unfolded, the flowering of an extraordinary civilization. The Great Wall stood at the edges of this world, guarding a heartland that pulsed with invention. It was during the Song era that gunpowder first flickered into human use, that compasses guided ships with certainty, that the printing press spread texts with a speed unknown before. Inside China, the world was changing. Outside its walls, forces gathered that would one day shake the empire to its core. On the frontier, soldiers felt this tension more keenly than anyone. They kept watch from their towers, their eyes scanning the horizon for dust clouds that meant riders approaching. Some nights were filled with silence, only the groan of wood in the wind. Others carried a sudden cry, horns echoing in the dark, hooves thundering across the earth. For the farmers who lived near the wall, life was a pendulum. Seasons of peace when fields bloomed with wheat, followed by sudden raids when the crops burned and homes emptied in panic.
Yet the wall was not only a place of fear. In the Song dynasty's long centuries, its gates became points of exchange, where merchants brought not just goods, but songs, stories, and customs. A Persian trader might pause in a frontier town, unfurling a carpet woven with intricate designs. A Turkic horseman might sell hardy mounts, their breath steaming in the winter air. Slowly, at these meeting points, cultures blended. You could hear Chinese lutes mingling with foreign flutes, taste noodles beside spiced lamb, see robes dyed in indigo worn alongside silken gowns. The wall framed not just a boundary, but a dialogue of worlds. The Song poets, much like their Tang predecessors, captured this interplay of strength and fragility. They wrote of the wall as a distant place, heavy with longing. A soldier's wife might gaze at the mountains and wonder if her husband still breathed. A scholar might write verses about the futility of stone against the tides of history. The wall inspired both pride and melancholy, for it reminded everyone of the empire's limits. One such poet, Lu Yu, a man of letters and sorrow, often reflected on the struggles of his time. His works carried the ache of watching the empire yield ground to invaders, the helplessness of seeing the wall stretched thin. In his verses, the wall became not only a structure of defense, but also a symbol of the resilience and heartbreak of a people who yearned for security, who clung to the memory of golden ages past. And still, in the everyday lives of soldiers, the wall remained constant. Imagine a cold winter morning in a watchtower. Snow drifts along the parapets, muffling every sound. A lone guard wraps his cloak tighter, his breath freezing in the air. He peers northward, where the horizon is nothing but white. The wall beneath his boots is ancient, repaired, rebuilt, but still carrying the weight of centuries. He thinks of home, of family far away, but he cannot leave his post. His life is tethered to this endless stone ribbon, this fragile divide between the known and the unknown.
For the Song dynasty, the wall was tested repeatedly. The Khitan Liao, to the northeast, pressed hard, demanding tribute. Later, the Jurchen Jin would rise, their armies fierce and relentless. The wall, though sturdy, could not always stop them. Sometimes it fell silent as riders swept past. Sometimes it echoed with the clash of swords and the cries of men. The Song emperors faced choices no ruler wished to make: to fight, to pay, or to retreat. And in these choices, the wall stood always as witness. Yet even in times of concession, the wall was never abandoned. Repairs continued, towers were strengthened, and soldiers kept their stations. For though dynasties bent, they rarely broke entirely. The heart of China always endured, nurtured by its people's resilience. The wall, scarred but standing, mirrored that endurance. Meanwhile, within the empire, life blossomed. Markets bustled with traders, scholars debated Confucian ideals, artists painted landscapes of mist and mountains. Families gathered in tea houses, savoring the fragrance of leaves steeped in porcelain cups. Children laughed in courtyards, chasing one another beneath lantern light. All this unfolded because the wall, in its quiet strength, allowed time and space for peace to exist, even if fragile. Travelers who reached the frontier often felt awe at its sight. For those from the interior, seeing the wall for the first time was overwhelming. Its scale, its silence, its sense of eternity. For foreigners, it seemed almost otherworldly, a structure born not merely of stone, but of human determination across generations. It was here, at this line, that one civilization met another, where empires tested their will, where dreams of power and survival collided. The wall's stones carried stories that no record could fully capture. Every crack, every weathered edge whispered of hands that had lifted, of sweat that had fallen, of lives given to its making. The wall was not only the pride of emperors, but also the testament of ordinary people. Soldiers who patrolled it, farmers who built it, craftsmen who repaired it. In their labor, the wall gained its soul. And so, as the Song dynasty moved through its centuries, balancing brilliance with vulnerability, the wall continued to hold its place in history. It was never perfect, never invincible, but it endured. Against winds, against snow, against the shifting tides of kingdoms and tribes, it remained, a long, quiet presence beneath the stars. As evening fell along the frontier, the torches once more flickered on the towers. Merchants unpacked their goods, soldiers warmed their hands at fires, poets sharpened their brushes to ink verses under moonlight. And all of them, in their different ways, looked upon the wall, some with hope, some with weariness, some with quiet reverence. The Great Wall was more than stone. It was memory. It was promise. It was the breath of history stretched across mountains and deserts, watching over all who lived within its embrace. Night on the Great Wall was unlike anywhere else in the empire. As the last glow of daylight faded, the horizon became an ocean of black, broken only by the outline of mountains and the silver ribbon of moonlight stretching across stone battlements. For the soldiers on duty, this was the most fragile time. During daylight, the land was visible. By night, anything could stir beyond the darkness, friend, foe, or ghost. The watchtowers came alive at sundown. Oil lamps flickered in the wind, their flames casting shadows across narrow walls. Guards wrapped themselves in cloaks, stamping their feet to keep warm, and placed their hands near small braziers. The wind whistled like an endless voice, threading through the walls' gaps and cracks. Sometimes the silence was broken by the call of an owl or the low growl of wolves echoing from far valleys. Yet always, behind those sounds, came the unspoken awareness. Somewhere out there, tribes of horsemen roamed the steppes, watching, waiting, choosing their moment. The Song dynasty had made uneasy peace with some northern powers, but peace was never guaranteed. Tribute in the form of silk and silver bought time, not trust. And so the wall remained vital, even when it was not enough. Soldiers stationed there lived lives of repetition and discipline. At dawn, they raised the banners. At midday, they patrolled. And at night, they stared into the void beyond. Each man carried with him both pride and fatigue. Pride because he was protecting the heart of his civilization. Fatigue because the burden never ended. In nearby villages, life bent itself around the presence of the wall. Farmers worked fields carved into rugged soil, their harvests often feeding the soldiers. Children grew up playing in the shadow of towers, learning early that beyond the wall was a different world. Market days were lively, when caravans brought fabrics, spices, and stories from far lands. A trader from Samarkand might display shimmering glass. A man from the steppes might offer fur or horses. Bargaining filled the air. Laughter mingled with suspicion, and cultures overlapped in the narrow space between stone and desert. Created not just defense, but also identity. For those who lived near it, the wall was a reminder of belonging. We are inside, part of the empire, shielded by stone. Yet at the same time, it was a reminder of fragility, because everyone knew that stone alone could not hold back every storm of history, and storms were coming. The Jin dynasty of the Jurchens rose to the north, testing the Song's strength. Their cavalry was fast and fierce, their discipline sharp. Time and again they pressed southward, and time and again the wall strained beneath their assault. There were battles where the wall was breached, gates thrown open, cities lost. And yet, each time, the Song rallied, rebuilt, repaired. The wall became like a living thing, wounded, scarred, but never destroyed. Inside the empire, even in these uncertain times, life flourished. The Song dynasty was not defined only by war, but also by brilliance. Cities like Kaifeng thrived with art, scholarship, and invention. Printing presses spread knowledge at a pace unimaginable in earlier dynasties. Painters captured landscapes where mist hung on mountains like silk. Engineers built bridges of iron and wood, connecting rivers and roads. Merchants sailed with compasses that pointed them reliably through fog and storm. The Great Wall, at the northern frontier, was the silent guardian of this flowering world. Imagine a scholar-poet traveling from Kaifeng to the wall. He carries a scroll of his latest verses, hoping to inspire soldiers with words of loyalty and courage. When he arrives at a watchtower, he sees their weary eyes, their cracked hands from frost and stone. He recites his poem by torchlight, his voice rising over the wind. The stones hold back the step, but the hearts of men hold back the night. Endure, for behind you lies the world, a world of ink, of tea, of song. Guard it until dawn.
The soldiers nod, some smiling faintly, others staring silently into the darkness. For them, poetry cannot warm the body, but it can warm the spirit. The wall was not merely defended by stones, it was defended by faith. Faith in culture, in home, in the idea that life behind these stones was worth protecting. And yet, with each passing century, the burden grew heavier. The gene eventually forced the song south, capturing Kai Feng, the jewel of the empire. The wall that once seemed endless was revealed to be finite, and at times, fragile. The southern Song dynasty survived, brilliant and determined, but the northern wall stood in silence, its towers often abandoned, its soldiers gone. Still, the wall endured. Even when neglected, even when quiet, it remained a skeleton of stone across the earth. Shepherds grazed their flocks in its shadow. Merchants traveled along its edges. Poets mourned its fate in ink. The wall became less of a shield and more of a monument, standing witness to the shifting of dynasties. It is here that we see one of the wall's most mysterious qualities, its ability to outlast those who build and abandon it. The Qin had raised it, the Han had extended it, the Tang had strengthened it, the Song had leaned upon it. Dynasties rose, dynasties fell, but the wall remained, worn, scarred, but unyielding. At night, under a star-filled sky, this truth seemed most vivid. Picture the Milky Way arching above the dark silhouette of the wall. A lone soldier leans against the battlements, his lantern dimming, his eyes heavy with sleep. He knows he may never see the battles of history written in books, but he is part of them. He is one of the countless, nameless men who stand upon these stones, giving them meaning. His story may fade, but the wall will remember. And so, in the Song dynasty, the Great Wall was both triumph and tragedy. It protected, it failed, it endured, it inspired. Its stones carried the footprints of emperors, generals, merchants, peasants, poets, and guards. Its presence was constant, even as the empire shifted around it. By the time the Song fell to the Mongols, the wall was already ancient, already layered with centuries of memory. Yet even as new rulers came, the wall remained. It had been many things: barrier, marketplace, stage for poetry, witness to loss. But above all, it was eternal, stretching across the land like the slow breath of history. And in the silence of night, when the wind whispered through its cracks, the wall spoke to those who listened. Empires are fleeting, but stone remembers.
As the Mongol steppe riders surged into history, the Great Wall once again faced a test beyond imagination. The Song dynasty, weakened and fractured, could no longer depend solely on the wall's strength. The Mongols were unlike any force before them, swift, coordinated, and relentless. Their horses covered vast distances in days, their strategies bending landscapes to their will. No wall, no matter how strong, could hold them forever. But before conquest came, there were years of tension, years when the wall stood as both shield and illusion. The watchtowers flamed with warnings as scouts spotted Mongol horsemen in the distance. Garrison commanders rushed messages southward, pleading for reinforcements. Soldiers at their posts pressed their backs against cold stone, hands gripping spears tighter, eyes scanning the horizon. Each dawn was uncertain. Would it bring another quiet sunrise, or a storm of hooves and arrows? Still, daily life went on. Farmers near the frontier sowed their crops, though always with ears tilted toward the north. Villagers repaired roofs, shaped clay pots, raised children, ordinary rhythms against the extraordinary backdrop of history. Mothers hummed lullabies while distant watchfires glowed on the ridges. Children traced their fingers along ancient carvings in stones, whispering to themselves, "The wall protects us." Hope clung to stone even as fear lingered in every breath. The Mongols admired the wall, but did not fear it. To them, it was another obstacle to be outmaneuvered. They rode around its ends, broke through gates with relentless force, and sometimes even used abandoned sections as their own pathways into the empire. And yet, paradoxically, they too recognized its symbolic weight, for even the greatest conquerors paused in its shadow, acknowledging that here stood not just stones, but centuries of defiance. As the Mongols advanced, the Song court retreated south. The wall, so mighty for generations, found itself silent, almost mournful. Towers once filled with men now held only wind and dust. The stones, weathered by time, seemed to sag with the weight of defeat. And yet, even as garrisons emptied, the wall endured. Abandoned does not mean erased. Silent does not mean forgotten.
For travelers of the 13th century, walking along stretches of the wall was like wandering through the bones of a giant. Grass sprouted between bricks, foxes darted in and out of cracks, and lonely banners flapped without command. The wall had become a witness rather than a weapon, watching as Mongols swept into China and reshaped its destiny. And yet, something remarkable happened in this period of loss. The wall became a memory that could not die. Though the Mongols conquered, they could not erase the meaning of the wall. Villagers still looked to its silhouette as a line between past and future. Scholars still wrote verses about its strength. Pilgrims still walked its shadow. Even when it failed, the wall inspired, for it was proof of the human desire to build, to defend, to dream of permanence. When the Yuan dynasty, the Mongol dynasty, established control over China, the wall faded into relative quiet. The Mongols ruled with confidence, often without relying heavily on its defenses. And yet, the wall remained, a spine across the earth, waiting for history's next turn. At night, under a clear northern sky, the silence deepened. The wall, scarred but unbroken, seemed almost to breathe with the wind. The stars glittered above like an eternal ceiling, each one a reminder that dynasties rise and fall, but time flows endlessly. A solitary traveler could walk for miles along the ramparts without seeing another soul, only the sound of boots on stone echoing into the vast dark. It was in these moments that the wall revealed its deeper nature, not just a shield, but a mirror of humanity itself. Our hopes, fears, triumphs, and defeats etched into every brick. Imagine a lone scholar of the Yuan dynasty standing atop a deserted watchtower. His lantern flickers as he opens a scroll, reading aloud words written centuries before. He whispers to the stones, "This wall was built by hands now dust, yet I walk where they once walked. Their strength is gone, but their dream remains." The wall does not answer, but the wind carries his voice down its length, as though the stones themselves were listening. And so,
During the Mongol years, the Great Wall stood in a strange state, neglected but not gone, wounded but still whole. It was no longer the front line of empire, but it was never forgotten. In its silence, it gathered strength, waiting for the day when new rulers would breathe life back into its stones, when once again it would blaze with torches and echo with the footsteps of guards. History teaches us this: the wall has always been more than its immediate purpose. Even in defeat, even in neglect, it lives on as memory, as symbol, as promise. That is why, even as empires collapse, the wall remains. And when night stretched long over the 13th century, the wall, silent under moonlight, became more than defense. It became a lullaby of stone, vast, steady, eternal, reminding all who slept in its shadow that though kingdoms may fall, something always endures. The Yuan dynasty ruled, yet the wall endured, stretching quietly across mountains and deserts like a sleeping dragon. While the Mongols reshaped China under Kublai Khan, the wall became less a fortress and more a background presence. Steady, silent, waiting. It no longer bore the weight of constant soldiers or urgent signal fires. Instead, it listened. It listened to the voices of traders along the Silk Road, to the songs of shepherds guiding their flocks near its stones, to the sigh of winds brushing through its watchtowers. For those who lived nearby, the wall was part of daily life. Farmers grazed cattle in its shadow. Children clambered up its slopes to chase one another. Elders sat by its base telling stories of emperors long gone. Some whispered tales of dragons buried beneath its foundation, guardians who rose when China was in danger. Others spoke of the sweat and tears of millions who had carried stones on their backs, leaving their spirit in the mortar. These stories were not written in official histories, but they lived in the hearts of the people. The Mongols, pragmatic in their rule, did not dismantle the wall. They did not fear it. Instead, they let it stand as a monument to the ages that came before. In their empire, the wall was less boundary than memory. But even so, its presence shaped the land, dividing climates, guiding rivers, sheltering fields. Nature itself seemed to bend around its vast length, as if acknowledging the hand of humanity carved into the earth. As seasons turned, ivy crept up abandoned watchtowers, snow layered across broken battlements, and birds built nests in cracks between bricks. The wall became part of the natural world again, blending with hills and forests. And yet, even in decay, it remained unmistakable. To stand before it was to feel small, as though touching the edge of something beyond comprehension.
Travelers of the Yuan era wrote of this awe. Some described the wall as a sleeping titan, its spine curling across the land. Others saw it as a necklace binding together mountains and valleys, each stone a bead of memory. Poets compared its length to the path of the Milky Way, a mirror of heaven on earth. To walk its ruins at twilight was to walk in the company of eternity. But the wall was not simply romanticized. It still served. Local warlords reinforced parts of it, using towers to mark their authority. Caravan traders sometimes sheltered within its ruins when storms rose suddenly from the steppe. At times, Mongol patrols themselves used its pathways as convenient routes to move swiftly between garrisons. The wall, though neglected, still shaped human movement, still carried voices, still bore witness. And in the quiet of the night, Under Yuan skies, the wall began to teach another lesson. That strength is not always in use, but in endurance. The wall did not need soldiers to prove its power. It did not need torches to prove its worth. Its simple presence, stretching vast and immovable, was enough. Dynasties could rise and fall, but the wall stood. Empires could conquer and crumble, but the wall endured. Imagine standing on a crumbling tower in those days. The stones are cold beneath your hand, worn smooth by centuries of wind. The plains spread out endlessly, moonlight painting them silver. In the distance, the faint sound of hooves echoes. Not an army this time, but a small group of herders guiding their horses home. The night is vast, the silence heavy, but the wall makes you feel less alone. It is as if the labor of countless souls still hums within it, a heartbeat of stone beneath the stars. Stones look.
Generations passed under the Yuan. Children born during conquest grew into elders who could no longer recall a time before Mongol rule. Yet the wall connected them still to their ancestors, to the memory of China before the Mongols, to the idea that even when overrun, identity remains. That is why the wall was never just defense. It was memory, heritage, spirit. And so the Yuan dynasty lived with the wall quietly, without trying to erase it, without fully reviving it. It was a companion more than a tool, a monument more than a weapon. Still, time moved forward, and with time, change always comes. For though the Yuan seemed unstoppable, even their empire would falter. And when it did, the wall, patient as always, would be ready to rise again. In these long centuries, the wall became a lullaby of the land. Farmers sang songs of harvest as they leaned against its stones. Lovers etched names into its bricks, promising their bond would last as long as the wall itself. Monks walked its deserted paths in meditation, each step echoing against silence. At dusk, when the sun bled red across the horizon, the wall turned to shadow, then to silhouette, then to dream. And in that dream, the empire of China, no matter who ruled it, found a reminder of its continuity. The wall was more than protection. It was reassurance. It was permanence. And as centuries stretched on through Mongol rule and beyond, it became clear empires may command the moment, but the wall commands time.
As the Yuan dynasty waned, the wall once again stirred in the imagination of the Chinese people. For though the Mongols had conquered, they could not erase centuries of belief. The wall was not simply stone. It was spirit, a presence woven into the very soil of the land. Even in ruins, even when untended, it inspired a sense of continuity, a reminder that China had survived invasion before and would rise again. The late Yuan years were marked by unrest. Heavy taxation, floods, and famine left the people weary. Bandits roamed provinces, peasant uprisings flared, and whispers of rebellion echoed along trade routes. Against this backdrop, the wall seemed to sigh, as though it too sensed the shifting of power. Once again, it would be called upon to watch, to guard,
to endure. The Mongols, powerful as they had been, faced the inevitable truth that all dynasties face. Time erodes strength. Their empire fractured, their control weakened, and from the heart of China rose the Ming. With them came a vision, not only of reclaiming sovereignty, but of restoring dignity. And in this vision, the wall was reborn. But before the Ming would breathe life back into its stones, the wall lingered in twilight. For decades, it stood as a ghost of itself, parts buried under sandstorms in the Gobi, parts swallowed by creeping forests in the north. Yet, even then, travelers who came upon it found themselves stilled. Marco Polo, when describing his journeys through Yuan China, made note of vast fortifications and walls that seemed endless. Other envoys marveled at the sheer audacity of its design. Though neglected, the wall remained unforgettable. For those who lived nearby, its presence was personal. Farmers planting millet on its southern side believed the wall blocked harsh northern winds, protecting their crops. Shepherds driving goats through narrow passes spoke of voices carried on the wall at night, as if the stones remembered the soldiers who once stood watch. Children dared each other to climb broken towers and listen for echoes, claiming the wall could speak if you pressed your ear close enough.
Legends continued to flourish. One story told of a woman who walked the length of the wall, searching for her husband, conscripted and never returned. Her tears, it was said, turned the mortar to salt. Another spoke of dragons slumbering beneath its stones, their scales forming ridges along its length, their breath rising as mist at dawn. These myths, born of suffering and imagination, gave the wall a soul. By the 14th century, the Yuan dynasty faltered further. Rebel groups grew bolder, armies clashed across provinces, and the people longed for a return to Chinese rule. The wall, battered but unbroken, seemed to wait with them, patient as always. The Mongols had once thundered past it in conquest, but soon they would retreat through it in defeat. The balance of history was shifting. And then came the Ming. With their rise, the wall entered one of its most extraordinary chapters. But in those last quiet years of the Yuan, it remained what it had always been, a witness, a monument to resilience, a spine across the land carrying memory from one dynasty to the next. If you stood upon its stones in that fading age, the view would have been haunting. The battlements cracked but still upright, the watchtowers hollow, yet still standing against wind and storm. The horizon stretched endlessly, the wall curving away until it disappeared into haze. In that moment, you would feel both the frailty of human power and the permanence of human will. Dynasties could collapse, empires could vanish, but the wall remained, battered, silent, eternal. Night would fall, and the wall would soften under moonlight. No soldiers marched, no torches burned, only the sound of insects and the occasional cry of an owl. The world was shifting again, but the wall held its breath, waiting. This is the gift of the wall. It endures, not as a static monument, but as a living memory. With every empire, it takes on new meaning. For the Qin, it was unification. For the Han, it was trade and expansion. For the Tang, it was culture and connection. For the Yuan, it was endurance. Proof that even under foreign rule, China's soul remained unbroken. And so, in those final decades of Mongol rule, the wall was not forgotten. It stood, weathered and worn, but still stretching across mountains and deserts, still marking the line between worlds, still whispering to anyone who approached, "I am here. I have always been here. I will always be here."
When the Ming Dynasty rose in 1368, driving the Mongols back beyond the steppes, China exhaled a breath that had been held for nearly a century. The UN were gone. Their reign of foreign dominance was over. The Ming promised revival, a return to native rule, a return to traditions, a return to dignity. And in the hearts of its people, one image stood tall: the wall. For the Ming, the wall was more than defense. It was a declaration, a message written across the mountains, deserts, and plains. China stands united again. China endures. The early Ming emperors saw at once that their northern frontier was both their greatest vulnerability and their greatest symbol. Though the Mongols had been pushed out, they remained restless beyond the steppe. Raids still came, swift and brutal, pouring across weak points in the frontier. To secure the dynasty's reign, the wall had to be reborn, not just as a patchwork of old fortifications, but as a colossal barrier, stronger, taller, more enduring than any before. Stone by stone, brick by brick, the Ming began their monumental project. Unlike earlier dynasties that had often relied on tamped earth and wood, the Ming turned to fired brick, quarried stone, and lime mortar. Their vision was not temporary, it was permanence. What they built would stand not for years, but for centuries. The wall of the Ming was no longer just a line. It was an architecture of empire. Watchtowers rose like lanterns, evenly spaced along ridges, signaling danger with smoke by day and fire by night. Fortresses, massive and self-sustaining, were constructed at key passes, housing entire garrisons of soldiers. The wall became not just a barrier, but a living organism, pulsing with the rhythm of soldiers' footsteps, the echo of drums, the glow of beacons across the horizon. To walk along the wall during the Ming Dynasty was to witness a marvel of human ambition. Imagine climbing its stone steps, each worn by countless boots, and looking out over the vast sweep of land. To the north stretched grasslands, wide and unpredictable, the domain of mounted warriors whose horses could outrun any infantry. To the south lay villages, fields, and cities, the heartbeat of the empire, and between them, the wall, holding, protecting, enduring.
The Ming did not merely rebuild the wall, they reimagined it. They gave it layers of defense, inner walls, outer walls, moats, and trenches. Some sections were as thick as 25 feet, strong enough to withstand siege weapons. Others climbed impossible cliffs, making nature itself an ally. The wall was designed not just to repel, but to intimidate. To stand on its battlements was to feel invincible. But the wall was not only about war. It was also about people. Thousands upon thousands of laborers were conscripted, peasants, farmers, prisoners, and soldiers alike.
They carried stones on their backs, hauled bricks on carts, mixed mortar under the burning sun and freezing winds. Many never returned home. The wall became their grave, their bones mingling with its foundations, their sweat and blood binding its stones. To this day, local villagers speak of the wall as both protector and tomb. And yet, for all its cost, the wall inspired awe. Travelers and diplomats who saw it during the Ming were stunned. Jesuit missionaries arriving in the 16th century wrote home describing it as one of the greatest wonders of the world. Poets compared it to a dragon uncoiling across the land, its scales glinting in sun and moonlight. Artists painted it stretching into mist, a ribbon of strength vanishing into clouds. The Wall of the Ming was not just a military frontier, it was a psychological frontier. It told the Mongols and other northern tribes, you may ride your horses to the horizon, but here you will stop. And it told the people of China, your empire is strong, your emperor protects you, the wall is your shield.
At night, when torches flickered in the watchtowers and the wind howled across the mountains, the wall felt alive. 1,000 miles of stone, breathing in silence. Its towers like glowing eyes watching over the land. For soldiers on duty, it was both comfort and burden. They slept in barracks built into the wall itself, their lives measured by the rhythm of shifts, standing guard, watching the horizon, waiting for signals of fire or smoke. Some wrote poems carved into bricks, their words hidden in the mortar, little echoes of humanity tucked inside the immensity of stone. The Ming's wall was not without flaw. Raids continued. No wall can be perfect, but it was stronger, longer, and more formidable than any before. It symbolized something deeper than defense. It symbolized the will of a civilization to define itself, to mark its space in the world, to say, this is ours. This is who we are. For centuries, the Wall of the Ming endured. Dynasties would come and go. Emperors would rise and fall. But the wall remained, vast and unwavering. And for those who saw it for the first time, whether peasant, poet, soldier, or traveler, it was unforgettable. The Ming had given the wall its most enduring form, the one we recognize today, the one tourists walk upon, the one seen from space in legend. The wall had become more than fortification. It had become China itself.
When the Ming Dynasty rose in 1368, driving the Mongols back beyond the steppes, China exhaled a breath that had been held for nearly a century. The UN were gone. Their reign of foreign dominance was over. The Ming promised revival, a return to native rule, a return to traditions, a return to dignity. And in the hearts of its people, one image stood tall: the wall. For the Ming, the wall was more than defense. It was a declaration, a message written across the mountains, deserts, and plains. China stands united again. China endures. The early Ming emperors saw at once that their northern frontier was both their greatest vulnerability and their greatest symbol. Though the Mongols had been pushed out, they remained restless beyond the steppe. Raids still came, swift and brutal, pouring across weak points in the frontier. To secure the dynasty's reign, the wall had to be reborn, not just as a patchwork of old fortifications, but as a colossal barrier, stronger, taller, more enduring than any before. Stone by stone, brick by brick, the Ming began their monumental project. Unlike earlier dynasties that had often relied on tamped earth and wood, the Ming turned to fired brick, quarried stone, and lime mortar. Their vision was not temporary, it was permanence. What they built would stand not for years, but for centuries. The wall of the Ming was no longer just a line. It was an architecture of empire. Watchtowers rose like lanterns, evenly spaced along ridges, signaling danger with smoke by day and fire by night. Fortresses, massive and self-sustaining, were constructed at key passes, housing entire garrisons of soldiers. The wall became not just a barrier, but a living organism, pulsing with the rhythm of soldiers' footsteps, the echo of drums, the glow of beacons across the horizon. To walk along the wall during the Ming Dynasty was to witness a marvel of human ambition. Imagine climbing its stone steps, each worn by countless boots, and looking out over the vast sweep of land. To the north stretched grasslands, wide and unpredictable, the domain of mounted warriors whose horses could outrun any infantry. To the south lay villages, fields, and cities, the heartbeat of the empire, and between them, the wall, holding, protecting, enduring.
The Ming did not merely rebuild the wall, they reimagined it. They gave it layers of defense, inner walls, outer walls, moats, and trenches. Some sections were as thick as 25 feet, strong enough to withstand siege weapons. Others climbed impossible cliffs, making nature itself an ally. The wall was designed not just to repel, but to intimidate. To stand on its battlements was to feel invincible. But the wall was not only about war. It was also about people. Thousands upon thousands of laborers were conscripted, peasants, farmers, prisoners, and soldiers alike. They carried stones on their backs, hauled bricks on carts, mixed mortar under the burning sun and freezing winds. Many never returned home. The wall became their grave, their bones mingling with its foundations, their sweat and blood binding its stones. To this day, local villagers speak of the wall as both protector and tomb. And yet, for all its cost, the wall inspired awe. Travelers and diplomats who saw it during the Ming were stunned. Jesuit missionaries arriving in the 16th century wrote home describing it as one of the greatest wonders of the world. Poets compared it to a dragon uncoiling across the land, its scales glinting in sun and moonlight. Artists painted it stretching into mist, a ribbon of strength vanishing into clouds.
The Wall of the Ming was not just a military frontier, it was a psychological frontier. It told the Mongols and other northern tribes, you may ride your horses to the horizon, but here you will stop. And it told the people of China, your empire is strong, your emperor protects you, the wall is your shield.
At night, when torches flickered in the watchtowers and the wind howled across the mountains, the wall felt alive. 1,000 miles of stone, breathing in silence. Its towers like glowing eyes watching over the land. For soldiers on duty, it was both comfort and burden. They slept in barracks built into the wall itself, their lives measured by the rhythm of shifts, standing guard, watching the horizon, waiting for signals of fire or smoke. Some wrote poems carved into bricks, their words hidden in the mortar, little echoes of humanity tucked inside the immensity of stone. The Ming's wall was not without flaw. Raids continued. No wall can be perfect. But it was stronger, longer, and more formidable than any before. It symbolized something deeper than defense. It symbolized the will of a civilization to define itself, to mark its space in the world, to say, this is ours. This is who we are. For centuries, the Wall of the Ming endured. Dynasties would come and go. Emperors would rise and fall. But the wall remained, vast and unwavering. And for those who saw it for the first time, whether peasant, poet, soldier, or traveler, it was unforgettable. The Ming had given the wall its most enduring form, the one we recognize today, the one tourists walk upon, the one seen from space in legend. The wall had become more than fortification. It had become China itself.
But this marvel came at a cost. Thousands upon thousands of men were conscripted, peasants, farmers, prisoners, and soldiers alike. They hauled stones, mixed mortar, carried supplies across mountains and deserts. Many never returned. They were buried in the wall itself, their bones mixing with its mortar, their sweat and blood binding its foundations. Villagers whispered that the wall was built not only of stone, but of souls. Still, the wall inspired awe. For ordinary people living in northern villages, it was a shield. For the empire, it was a statement to the world. China was strong again. Foreign visitors who saw it during the 16th century could barely believe it. Jesuit missionaries described it as one of the greatest wonders they had ever seen. Poets compared it to a dragon glinting under the sun, stretching endlessly into the mist. At night, when torches glowed in the watchtowers, the wall looked alive. A chain of fire stretching across mountains, 1,000 eyes watching the horizon. Soldiers stationed along it lived harsh lives. They endured scorching summers, freezing winters, and endless monotony. Yet many found meaning in the duty. They carved poems into bricks, etched names into stone, leaving fragments of their humanity hidden in the vastness. The Wall of the Ming was not invincible. Raids still came.
The Mongols remained dangerous, testing weak points, slipping through where they could, but the wall gave China something it had lacked for centuries: time. Time to prepare, to respond, to defend. It slowed the enemy. It exhausted them. And in doing so, it safeguarded villages, cities, and farmlands behind its great stone spine.
When the Ming Dynasty fell in 1644, the wall, for all its might, could not save the empire. The Manchus, a people from the northeast, swept through its gates, taking Beijing and establishing the Qing dynasty. For centuries, the wall had been built to keep northern peoples out. Now, one of those very peoples ruled all of China. And with their arrival, the role of the wall began to change. The Qing emperors were skilled at governance. They were conquerors, but they were also pragmatic. Having once lived beyond the wall themselves, they understood its strengths and its limitations. They knew it could slow an enemy, but it could not stop the tides of history. With the Qing expanding their empire deep into Central Asia, Tibet, and Mongolia, the wall no longer sat at the frontier. Instead, it became a line in the middle of an empire too vast to be defined by one boundary. For the first time in centuries, the wall began to lose its central purpose. No longer reinforced with new stone, no longer bristling with soldiers in every tower, it started to fade into the background of history. Yet the wall did not vanish. Villagers lived in its shadow, pulling bricks from its battlements to build houses, markets, and farms. Watchtowers became storage sheds, sheep pens, even temples. Travelers still walked its paths, now not as guards, but as wanderers, pilgrims, merchants. And poets, even in the Qing age, continued to write verses about its majesty. For though its military role diminished, its symbolic power only grew.
The wall became a reminder of the past, a scar across the land that spoke of both greatness and tragedy. It reminded the Chinese people of resilience, but also of the cost of fear, war, and ceaseless defense. By the 18th century, under the long reigns of emperors like Kangxi and Qianlong, the wall had fallen largely silent. The Qing had extended China's borders so far north and west that the frontier no longer brushed against it. Instead, grass sprouted between its stones, birds nested in abandoned towers, sections collapsed under storms and earthquakes. What had once been guarded by thousands was now left to time. And yet, people did not forget. Travelers wrote of their awe, describing it as a dragon sprawled across mountains. Scholars saw it as a metaphor, a wall of the mind, dividing civilization from chaos. Even foreign envoys and explorers began to take note. When Jesuit missionaries visited, they marveled at its sheer scale. Later, during the 19th century, European travelers sketched its ruins, astonished that something so immense could be so neglected. The Great Wall also entered legend. Stories spread of ghosts haunting its towers, the restless souls of those who had died building it. Mothers told children tales of men buried beneath its stones, of women waiting in vain for husbands who never returned. The wall was no longer just architecture. It was myth, memory, and mourning
all woven together. But history moved on. China faced new challenges: invasions from the West, the Opium Wars, internal rebellion, the fall of dynasties. In these storms, the wall could offer no protection. Cannons and ships had replaced horsemen on the steppe. The world had grown too interconnected for any wall to keep danger away. And so, the wall stood as witness, silent, crumbling, but never entirely gone. It whispers of emperors who dreamed of safety. It sighs with the breath of peasants who carried stones up impossible slopes. It hums with the echoes of drums, banners, and hooves that once thundered across the horizon. And it murmurs with the laughter of children who now play on its steps, unaware they are part of a story that stretches back millennia. The wall no longer guards an empire, but perhaps it guards something greater: memory. A memory of what people can build when united, and a reminder of what such ambition costs. And for you, lying in bed, listening to this story, the wall can now serve another purpose. It can be a pathway into rest. Imagine standing on its highest tower at twilight. The mountains stretch in every direction, purple and gold in the fading sun. The wall winds away like a river of stone, fading into mist. The world is vast, but here you are safe. The air is still. The night is near. You breathe slowly, deeply, calmly. The soldiers are gone. The noise is gone. Only the stones remain, and the quiet rhythm of your own breath. With each exhale, let your thoughts settle, like dust sinking between the cracks of ancient bricks. With each inhale, imagine drawing strength from the mountains themselves. The wall stands, the earth stands, and you too are steady. There is no need to defend anything now, no need to hold on to the struggles of your day. Like the wall, you can simply exist, weathered, strong, peaceful. The stars emerge above. Their light rests gently on the wall, painting it silver. Owls call in the distance. A cool breeze brushes against your face. And in this moment, the great wall is no longer just stone. It is sanctuary. Close your eyes. Let its endless length guide you deeper into calm. Follow it as it stretches beyond the horizon until it dissolves into dream. The wall has seen dynasties rise and fall, centuries pass like seasons, storms and wars that once seemed eternal. But through it all, it has endured. So too will you endure. Rest now, knowing that you are part of something timeless. Rest now, letting go of what no longer matters. Rest now, as the wall itself drifts into silence. Good night.